Sule! The Stormlight Archive interludes are confusing. They often tee up characters that have no relevance to the current story, but become vastly more important 2 books later. So today, I want to help you understand just what's happening in Words of Radiance Interludes 3 and 4. I won't be spoiling anything while summarizing the chapters, but then I will give additional context found in other books at the end of the sections. And when we get to that point, I will give you the relevant spoiler warnings. So please use the chapters below at your own discretion. Interlude 3 begins with Rysn introspecting on the past year as the island they seek comes into view. She had heard about these floating islands of the Reshi people, but it wasn't until this moment that she discovered they're actually great shells. Yes, the Taina great shells of the Reshi Sea have grown so large that they can house entire towns of people. They're also worshipped by the Reshi as gods. As they pull their flotilla up to the creature, Rysn learns that the Reshi people are very unashamed of public nudity, and she grows embarrassed. Also, due to Vistim's condition, Rysn will need to be in charge of the trade. Her Babsk informs her that the Reshi people respect strength, and a sickly man like himself won't be able to make a deal. So now is time for Rysn to shine. Apparently the deal is not a negotiation. The terms of payment have been set years ago, and this is more of a formality. Rysn will need to be deemed worthy of the trade, and Vistim has assured her that she's not ready. How sweet of him. Rysn and her 2 guards start their journey up the Taina, walking on steps carved out of the shell. But along their journey, they're stopped by a strange blue-skinned man. The guard tenses up and whispers that he's an Amian. Yes, an Amian. These blue-skinned people are the original natives to the island Amia, which we also talked about in the Axes the Collector interlude. Since no one can return from a trip to Amia without dying, well, I guess these folks aren't too popular. After traveling through the rest of the jungle and climbing to nauseating heights, Rysn and her guards finally reach the head of the Taina. Here, she finds the king and many armed guards. As Rysn approaches, she notices that the king is actually a woman. As Rysn steps out on the shelf that the king occupies, a man steps out to meet her. Talik, a cruel negotiator that Vistim had specifically warned her about. Rysn debates with Talik for a while, and we learn a few things here. The name of the great shell that they're on is Raluna. The Reshi feed Raluna fruit as an offering, but this is not where it gets its sustenance. That is still a mystery. We also learn that the Reshi are led by a king, regardless of the gender of that leader. And Raluna is the one that makes the deals here. Talik is only there to see it through. As might be expected, the debate goes poorly for Rysn. She hasn't earned the Reshi respect like Vistim has, and because of that, they'll need to return next year. As she's nearly dismissed, the king herself chimes in softly to Talik. The king agrees to hear Rysn's argument for trade. Unfortunately for Rysn, that went just as well. We learn that Vistim earned his respect through an act of bravery, slaying a creature with some of the Reshi hunters. Rysn hasn't done anything like this, and yet again she's dismissed. However, Rysn believes that Vistim is dying, so she can't fail him. Because of that, she grabs a rope from the fruit offerings and jumps over the edge of the great shell, rappelling down towards Raluna's head. Here she pleads with Raluna, but unfortunately, the great shell just continues eating fruit off the rope that Rysn was on, and so Rysn is sent plummeting to the waters. From that height, the water is as hard as concrete. Sometime later, Rysn wakes up. Talik and Vistim are there watching over her. Rysn learns that Vistim was actually Talik's Babsk as well, and this whole negotiation was a setup to test Rysn. Unfortunately, she exceeded expectations, and as a result has been paralyzed from the waist down. All hope was not lost, however. Rysn's bravery attracted the attention of many other islands who now all wished to trade, and Raluna had given her a gift as well, an ancient creature long thought extinct. A Larkin of Amia. The end. So, wow, there's a lot to talk about here. First, let's start off with the low-hanging fruit. Was that too soon? The Amian that Rysn encountered in Raluna's jungle was, of course, Axes the Collector. We see him tied up by his legs, having been captured for asking too many questions about Taina's friend. Typical Axes. Now I want to talk about some light spoilers for the book Dawnshard. So if that's a deal breaker, then please skip ahead using the chapters below. So in Dawnshard, we find that this Larkin is actually very connected to the island of Amia. The Larkin were ancient guardians of this place and need to return there to continue growing. This creature, named Chiri Chiri, will stick with Rysn in the future, but the connection of the Larkin creature being tied to Amia and having Axes, the Amian, on this same island is very interesting to me. The Reshi Sea and Amia aren't exactly close to each other. Unfortunately, at this point, we really don't know what's going on with Amia. Again, as we talked about in the Axes episode. Also, did you catch what the guard said about how how Amiens are some evil creature posing as humans? There's some truth to this, but there are also two different types of Amiens. Saya Amiens, like Axes, and the much more secretive Dacian Amiens, the strange Kremling people that we learned a lot about in Dawnshard. Now let's talk a little bit more about the Taina. As far as we know, they're the largest great shells on Roshar. They are far larger than chasm fiends and quite a bit larger than santhids. However, they're still great shells. Giant crab-like creatures that are far too large to make any sense. The Taina actually bond to a spren that allows for this ridiculous size. And this is what Axes was trying to investigate. Unfortunately for him, the Reshi are a bit protective, and I don't blame them. We still don't know what this spren is, but we do know that the chasm fiends bond to mandras that allow them to walk at such great sizes. Perhaps the Taina bond greater mandras, or perhaps they bond many mandras. I'll leave that for you to speculate on. Finally, I want to talk about Raluna's king. We actually see them later on in Dawnshard, though you may not have caught it. You see, after Rysn left, Ralna, the king of Raluna and Talik's father, bonded an ash spren, becoming a dustbringer. The bond with the ash spren healed his body to match his gender identity. He would later depart for Urithiru to join the coalition of monarchs. Less than half of you currently watching right now are subscribed, and I'll make a deal with you. Subscribe! If you want to support us more directly, you can click the Patreon link in the description below. Just like our true Lightcaller patrons Mac, Aquila, Cobweb, Stephanie, Camride, and Blarg. Thank you guys so much for all of the support. Interlude 4, Last Legion, takes us back to Eshonai. She wrestles with what to do about Venli as she talks with a war pair from her force, Thud and Bila. They inspect a storm spren and a gemstone that Venli found. They consider the implications of using the spren to take a new form. Bila is bloodthirsty and only cares if this form will allow them to kill the humans. And Eshonai still worries that these spren may lead to the return of their gods. And here we learn a little bit more about Eshonai's people. First off, the rhythms are something happening across Roshar, and they're so consistent that the movements of the rhythm can be used to tell time. We also learn that the forms used to be gained by attracting the proper spren with the proper attitude during a high storm, but recently, the listeners have learned how to capture specific spren in gemstones to make their transformation more reliable. Eshonai encounters a couple of listeners in Dol form. This is the form that they take to spy on humans since it looks very similar to slave form. It turns out that some of the listeners are giving up. They're deciding to take this form to hide when the humans attack. They figure that becoming a slave to them is better than dying in the war. What a horrible decision to have to make. Eshonai then heads to her mother's home on the edge of Narak. We learn that Eshonai and Venli's mother is suffering from some sort of dementia for some time. Their mother, Jaxlim, believes that Venli is about to have her first transformation, an event that happened many years prior. Regardless of her condition, Eshonai still comes to her mother seeking advice on what to do, though keeping specifics cryptic. Eshonai's mother told Eshonai of the Last Legion, their ancestors who were part of an army many years ago. They were warriors who left behind their gods and forms of power to only know mate form and Dol form, but in exchange for their freedom. Jaxlim gives Eshonai a bag of old maps that the girl had drawn long ago as they had explored the former kingdom of Natanatan. We learn that these expeditions were what led Eshonai to discovering humans in the first place. After her time with her mother, Eshonai finally went to meet with the five leaders. One for each of the known forms. As the meeting begins, Eshonai speaks of her concern for this new form. It is a form from the gods, the ones they left so long ago for their freedom, and she fears that going down this path will enslave them once again. However, one of the 5 points out that humans have already started to surge bind. This means that their gods are going to be returning anyway, and it would be foolish to ignore this power to fight back. So, Eshonai finally gives in, agreeing to test the form at least, but only if she would be the one to do it. The 5 all agree to this, but Venli is infuriated that Eshonai would steal her glory. Eshonai explains that Venli is far too valuable to risk dying from this test. They have no idea what's gonna happen, and this is a sacrifice that she's willing to make. She even agrees to leave her blade and plate behind with Thum in case something happens to her, another willing sacrifice. Venli is still outraged over this, but Eshonai reassures her that the glory glory is still gonna be hers for the discovery. Eshonai muses to herself that she should still try and talk to Dalinar. If she can find a way to make peace without going through with this horrible Stormform idea, then she needs to take it. And that is the end of Interlude 4. Now for the spoilers. I'm gonna have to give a spoiler warning for Wind and Truth. If that's a deal breaker for you, then thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Otherwise, let's talk about this last legion. Wind and Truth shows us the true history of the listeners. Ba-Ado Mishram had given forms of power to the singers during the False Desolation, 2,000 years ago. Near the end of this desolation, a singer named Tuathan gathered a group of soldiers and their families to abandon the army. Mishram knew of this, and out of compassion, she let them flee. They then made the songs to remember their history, and then they abandoned their wrong forms and rhythms. Without their gods, they would forget their forms, and hopefully with the songs, they would remember them in later generations. But what they didn't know is that this would ultimately save their people. When Honor decided to betray Ba-Ado Mishram by having the bondsmith Malishi trap her in a gemstone and imprison her in the spiritual realm, Roshar broke. The forms of power that she gave fled, and her army became slave forms. Since the last legion, the listeners, already abandoned the forms, they didn't become slave form. This let them keep their freedom and independence for the next 2,000 years. Well, until Venli gets them all killed. Oopsies. But that's gonna be all for the connections. Sorry there weren't too many greater Cosmere connections. But what do you think? Will Eshonai be okay? Is Axes a demonic species hellbent on the world's destruction? Do you want to see Relluna become a walking fortress across Roshar? I do. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Colo?